In the sprawling, glittering universe of country music, some stars burn so brightly they become constellations, permanent fixtures in the night sky. Names like Johnny Cash, Dolly Parton, and Willie Nelson. Then there are the others, stars that blaze with an intense, beautiful light for a moment in time, commanding the attention of millions, only to slowly fade from view, their lights swallowed by the dawn of a new era. Their stories are often the most human, the most heartbreaking, and the most profound. This is the story of a man with a voice as smooth as Tennessee whiskey and as gentle as a summer evening. A man who, for a brilliant decade, stood shoulder to shoulder with the giants. He was the handsome face on album covers, the reassuring voice on the radio, the man who seemed destined to become the next great romantic icon of country music. His name was Tommy Overstreet. And if you were listening to country radio in the 1970s, you couldn't escape him. But if you started listening in the 1980s, you might never have heard of him at all. His story is a quiet tragedy of timing, a testament to how quickly the tides of culture can turn, sweeping away even the most successful artists. It's the story of the man who was seen as the great rival to the legendary Don Williams, only to be left behind by the very history he helped to write. This is the story of the man country music forgot and why we should absolutely remember him. To understand Tommy Overstreet, you have to understand the world he stepped into. The early 1970s in America was a time of deep uncertainty and transition. The counterculture revolution of the 60s had begun to curdle. The Vietnam War was casting a long, dark shadow over the national psyche, and the Watergate scandal was about to shatter the country's faith in its leaders. People were tired. They were bruised. They were looking for comfort, for something simple, honest, and reassuring. And they found it on the radio. Country music at the time was in the midst of its own transformation. The raw, gritty, honky-tonk sound of the 50s and the lush, string-laden Nashville sound of the 60s were giving way to something new. It was a smoother, more polished, and often more intimate sound that became known as country-politan. Artists like Charlie Pride, Conway Twitty, and Lynn Anderson were blending country sentiment with pop sensibilities, creating music that could feel at home in a dusty Texas bar or a slick suburban living room. Into this world of soft-focus romance and gentle melodies, two figures emerged with voices that seemed tailor-made for the era. One was a tall, quiet Texan who called himself the Gentle Giant, Don Williams. The other was a handsome, charismatic Oklahoman with a crooner's soul and a country heart, Tommy Overstreet. Both men possessed warm, impossibly smooth baritone voices. Both sang songs of love, heartbreak, and quiet devotion that resonated deeply with a mainstream audience hungry for sincerity. For a time, it seemed they were two sides of the same golden coin, destined to rule the decade together. But history, as it so often does, had other plans. Thomas Carey Overstreet was born on September 10, 1937 in Oklahoma City, but his roots were planted deep in the red dirt of Texas. Music wasn't just a passion in his family, it was a legacy. His first cousin was none other than Gene Austin, one of the most influential and successful crooners of the 1920s and 30s. Austin was a superstar of his time, a forerunner to Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra, whose sentimental, soft-voiced recordings sold in the tens of millions. This lineage was crucial. While other country boys were learning to pick and holler, Tommy was absorbing the art of smooth, intimate vocal delivery from one of its pioneers. The DNA of the pop crooner was baked into his own from the very beginning. His father, Gene Overstreet, was also a country western singer and a local personality. By the time Tommy was a teenager, He was already a seasoned performer, singing on his father's popular radio show in Abilene, Texas. He wasn't some outsider who stumbled into Nashville. He was born and bred in the business. He spent his late teens and early 20s honing his craft, not just as a singer, but as a showman. He toured with the legendary Slim Willett, managed a music venue in Austin, and even hosted his own television show in the city, a testament to his natural charisma and ambition. He was paying his dues, but he wasn't yet the star. He moved to Los Angeles and then to Nashville, the heart of the country music machine, taking a job as a manager for a music publishing company. For years, he worked behind the scenes, watching, learning, and waiting for his moment. He saw which songs became hits, he understood the machinery of the industry, and he knew the kind of sound that was starting to connect with audiences. All the while, that smooth, Gene Austen-inspired voice was waiting in the wings. His break finally came in 1969. He signed a contract with Dot Records, a label known for its polished country and pop acts. His early singles did moderately well, but they didn't quite capture the magic he was capable of. Then, in 1971, he recorded a song called Gwen, Congratulations. It was the perfect song at the perfect time. The melody was gentle, the production was clean and sophisticated, and Tommy's voice was pure, liquid comfort. The song tells the story of a man graciously congratulating his former lover on her wedding day, hiding his own heartbreak behind a veneer of polite well wishes. It was a masterclass in subtlety and quiet emotion. The song soared to number 5 on the Billboard country charts, and suddenly, Tommy Overstreet was a star. For the next 8 years, he was a fixture of country radio. He became known as the T.O. Express, a hit-making machine that rarely slowed down. He followed Gwen with a string of top 10 hits, many of them bearing a woman's name in the title, creating a personal, intimate connection with his largely female audience. There was Anne, Don't Go Running, a desperate plea to a lover on the verge of leaving, which became one of his signature songs. There was Jeannie's Waiting and Jeannie Marie, You Were a Lady. His biggest hit, Heaven Is My Woman's Love, released in 1972, perfectly encapsulated his appeal. It was a devotional, almost spiritual ode to romantic love, delivered with a sincerity that felt both deeply personal and universally relatable. His voice wasn't powerful in the way of a George Jones or a Conway Twitty. It didn't convey raw, gut-wrenching pain. Instead, it offered solace. It was the voice of a man who understood a woman's heart, who would treat it with tenderness and respect. In a world of honky-tonk hellraisers, Tommy Overstreet was the perfect gentleman. Throughout the 70s, his success was undeniable. He racked up 11 consecutive top 10 hits, a remarkable feat in any era. He was a constant presence on television shows like Hee Haw and The Midnight Special, his handsome looks and polished stage presence making him a natural for the screen. He was nominated for major awards and sold out venues across the country. He had crafted a perfect niche for himself, a brand of country music that was elegant, romantic, and enormously popular. During this time, the comparisons to Don Williams were inevitable and constant. Both were baritones, both sang gentle ballads, both avoided the rhinestones and bravado of many of their peers. On the surface, they seemed like two artists traveling on parallel tracks to superstardom, but subtle differences were there if you listened closely. Don Williams's sound was often more spare, more rustic, rooted in a kind of folk country minimalism. His persona was that of the reluctant star, the quiet cowboy who just happened to sing. Overstreet was different. His sound was more polished, more countrypolitan, with strings and background vocals that leaned closer to pop. His performance style was more that of a classic entertainer, a showman who was comfortable in the spotlight, a direct descendant of the crooners he grew up admiring. While Williams was the quiet man on the porch, Overstreet was the charming man on the stage. For most of the 70s, it seemed like there was more than enough room for both of them. One fan might prefer Williams's understated cool, another Overstreet's polished warmth. They were two kings ruling a shared kingdom of soft country, but a storm was gathering on the horizon. As the 1970s bled into the 1980s, the cultural mood began to shift again. The weariness of the early 70s was giving way to the swagger and excess of the 80s. In country music, this change had a name: urban cowboy. The 1980 film Urban Cowboy, starring John Travolta, was a cultural phenomenon. It wasn't just a movie. It was a watershed moment that fundamentally reshaped the sound and image of mainstream country music for years to come. The film romanticized a new kind of country experience, one based not on quiet rural life, but on mechanical bulls, sprawling Houston nightclubs, and a slicker, pop-infused soundtrack. Suddenly, the gentle, introspective ballads that had defined the 70s started to sound old-fashioned. The radio wanted something with more gloss, more rhythm, a bigger sound that could cross over to the pop charts. The era of Kenny Rogers, Dolly Parton's pop superstardom, and the band Alabama had arrived. The sound was bigger, the production was glossier, and the vibe was less about quiet devotion and more about good times and radio-friendly hooks. For an artist like Don Williams, whose sound was rooted in a timeless, almost folk-like authenticity, the shift was manageable. His gentle giant persona was so distinct, so iconic, that it transcended trends. He was a genre unto himself. But for Tommy Overstreet, whose style was more closely tied to the specific countrypolitan production of the 1970s, the wave was a tsunami. His last top 10 hit came in 1979. After that, the decline was swift and brutal. His singles in the early 80s struggled to crack the top 40, then the top 50, and then they stopped charting altogether. The sound he had perfected, the very sound that had made him a star, was now considered passé. The T.O. Express had run out of track. The music industry, in its relentless pursuit of the next big thing, had moved on, and Tommy Overstreet was left standing on the platform watching the train pull away. This is where the story often ends for artists like Tommy Overstreet. The hits dry up, the phone stops ringing, and they fade into a "where are they now?" trivia question. But the human story, the emotional story, is what happens in the years that follow. What does it feel like to have the world at your feet one day and to find that the world has changed its dance steps the next? There's little evidence to suggest Tommy Overstreet was a bitter man. In later interviews, he spoke of his career with a sense of clear-eyed pride and realism. He understood the nature of the business. He once said, reflecting on his approach to music, "I was a song man. I just tried to sing a good song." It was a simple, honest philosophy that defined his entire career. He wasn't trying to reinvent the wheel. He was trying to perfect it. He focused on finding lyrics that told a relatable story and delivering them with warmth and sincerity. This is the human core of his story. He wasn't a rebel or a revolutionary. He was a craftsman. Imagine a master artisan who spends his life perfecting the art of building beautiful, ornate wooden carriages. For a decade, his carriages are the most sought after in the land. Then overnight, the automobile is invented, and suddenly, no one wants a carriage anymore. The artisan's skill hasn't diminished. His craftsmanship is still exquisite, but the world no longer has a place for it. This was the fate of Tommy Overstreet. He was a master of a certain style of country music, and that style simply fell out of fashion. The pain of this isn't necessarily about ego or lost fame. It's about relevance. It's the quiet heartbreak of dedicating your life to a craft, only to see it become obsolete. One of the most revealing and rarely discussed aspects of his story is the shadow of his famous cousin, Gene Austin. While it was a source of pride, it was also a key to his identity as an artist. Overstreet wasn't a hillbilly singer who learned to be smooth. He was a crooner at heart who happened to sing country music. This made him unique in the 70s, but it also made him vulnerable when the genre decided to purge its pop influences in favor of either the slicker pop rock of Urban Cowboy or, later in the 80s, the neo-traditionalist movement that championed a return to honky-tonk roots. He was caught in the middle, too polished for the new traditionalists and not pop enough for the crossover giants. So, the central controversy or historical debate surrounding Tommy Overstreet isn't one of scandal, but of classification and legacy. Was he merely a Don Williams clone, as some critics at the time lazily suggested? Or was he a unique artist who suffered from an unfortunate case of historical bad timing? The argument for him being a derivative artist rests solely on the superficial similarity of their vocal tones. Yes, they both had smooth, warm baritones, but that's where the comparison should end. To call him a copy is to ignore his entire musical DNA. His phrasing, his showmanship, his song choices, they all pointed to a different tradition. The tradition of the popular vocalist, the entertainer. He was arguably more of a country Bing Crosby than a peer of Don Williams. He was carrying the torch of his cousin, Gene Austin, and bringing that crooner sensibility to Nashville. His career, viewed through this lens, becomes not a pale imitation, but a unique and successful fusion. He created a hybrid sound that perfectly captured the zeitgeist of the 1970s. The tragedy is that this unique fusion had an expiration date. When the cultural pendulum swung, it left him without a musical home. After his mainstream career ended, Overstreet did what many classic entertainers do. He found a new stage. He became a staple performer in Branson, Missouri, the live music mecca for artists of a certain vintage. There, for decades, he continued to perform for audiences who remembered and cherished his music. He wasn't on the charts anymore, but he was still singing his songs, connecting with the fans who had grown up with Gwen and Anne and Heaven Is My Woman's Love. He continued to tour and perform until health issues forced him to retire in the years before his passing in 2015. He died quietly at his home in Oregon, far from the Nashville spotlight that had once shone so brightly upon him. His death was noted in music circles, but it didn't command the kind of widespread headlines reserved for his more enduring contemporaries. The man country music forgot had finally quietly slipped away. His legacy is a warning about the danger of historical narratives that focus only on the biggest winners. By remembering only Don Williams as the sole proprietor of gentle country in the 70s, we flatten a rich and varied musical landscape. We erase the nuance. Tommy Overstreet wasn't just another voice. He was a distinct flavor, a unique presence who brought comfort and joy to millions of listeners. His songs were the soundtrack to countless romances, first dances, and quiet moments of reflection for an entire generation. That is not a small thing. His music represents a specific emotional shelter that the America of the 1970s desperately needed. In an age of turmoil, his voice was a promise that everything was going to be okay. It was gentle, it was decent, and it was kind. When the culture shifted to the chest-thumping bravado of the 80s, that brand of quiet kindness became a liability. But its value doesn't disappear just because it went out of style. In the end, the story of Tommy Overstreet isn't a story of failure. To have 11 consecutive top 10 hits is a staggering achievement. To create a body of work that is still cherished by loyal fans decades later is a triumph. His story is not about what he failed to become, but about what he so brilliantly was: a master craftsman of the 70s country ballad, a true songman. He was the man who was almost Don Williams, but more importantly, he was entirely Tommy Overstreet. He was the crooner's grandson, the gentleman on the stage, the reassuring voice in a troubled time. History may have been unkind to him, and the shifting sands of popular music may have buried his name. But for those who take the time to listen, to dig just beneath the surface of the official record, his voice is still there, smooth, gentle, and timeless, a beautiful, poignant echo from an era that is gone, but should never be forgotten. We're done for today. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this helpful, smash the like button, comment below, and hit subscribe for more great content coming your way soon.